So yeah, today I'm going to talk about design languages. So I'll talk about what a design language is, how we have built ours at SoundCloud, how we use it, and then also a little bit about how we're currently building it on Android and iOS. So first, a little bit of background about me. So I'm quite local. I'm from about half an hour away from here, but I've spent the last year or so living in Berlin, working at SoundCloud. If you don't know what SoundCloud is, it's a music platform. So we have mobile apps, we've got a web app. We're distributed in about 190 countries worldwide, and we've got about 170 million tracks on the platform. This is my favorite fact about SoundCloud. It's 90% of the traffic comes from mobile. So that is mobile web as well as mobile apps, but I think we do have a real focus on mobile. And I think when you think about some of the apps that you might use every day, a lot of companies have also got this mobile-focused approach. So there's often no big web presence for some of the biggest social media apps or banking apps. So I started working on Android back in 2010 while I was at uni. And the project I was working on for my third-year project was this app for books. It was originally supposed to be an iOS app, but I had an Android device, so pretty much the only reason why I'm still an Android developer now is just because of this project way back when, and I didn't want to buy an iPhone at the time. So in 2010, this is what Android looked like. So this is Eclair 2.1. This was the Nexus 1, which was Google's first stock Android phone. I didn't even have this device, so I had a HTC Desire, if anyone remembers that. And then whilst I was working on the project, they introduced 3.0 Honeycomb. It looked a little bit like this. So with the introduction of Honeycomb, they introduced fragments, and they also introduced this new design. So this was hollow design. And it wasn't until 2014 that they changed the design of Android, and with this big new look. So I'm sure you'll recognize this as material design. They introduced these cards or adaptive colors. You know, you take a photograph of some kind and you can adapt your app to these things. And at the time when this came out, I was working at the BBC, and the BBC had its own style already. So I think most people working there were kind of excited by this style, but a lot of people kind of thought it's great for indie developers, it's great for small sample projects, but it's not great for me and it's not great for the company because the company don't want this style. But I read this quote, which I thought was quite interesting. So the interface is the brand. So I realized that material design was, although they intended it to be for all apps, they also wanted material design for themselves. So it actually was for Google, because by 2015, material design had been rolled out across all Google apps. So all of the big Google apps that I'm sure you recognize. And so this interface is the brand. I think what they were trying to achieve is they wanted you to know that you're in a Google product when you're in one. They want you to recognize it as a Google product. And then in 2016, they brought out this website, Material.io, which is where it turned a bit more into a design language. So this was to showcase their visual identity, and it brought along with it some new libraries and some new resources. And so I've just mentioned design language. That's the purpose of my talk today. So there's a lot of arguments over terminology, and you may know design languages already. You may have heard them called design systems. For the purpose of this talk, I'd like to define it as this. So I've defined it as a centralized set of principles and reusable components using a shared language. So it's centralized, which means that there's a single point of truth. Everybody knows where to look for this thing. Changing one place affects all places as well. So I won't really talk about principles in this talk, but we do have some principles at SoundCloud. And so the principles are supposed to be what the key characteristics of your product, so what your product represents, essentially. So the way that we do it at SoundCloud is we take two equally valid points, and we contrast them to guide in decision-making. So this is for designers. So for example, one of our principles would be impression over accuracy. And so, for example, this could be used in the like button. So when you tap on the like button, we would immediately change the state of the like button. We don't wait for the response from the server to say whether or not something's changed. We just immediately show the user that thing's changed, and we deal with the fact that it might not be as accurate. So by reusable components, this is a component library. This is used by the designers. It helps them to design and build faster. It's consistent amongst designers, so different designers can design a particular screen. One thing can happen on one team at one time, and a new designer on a different team can design a similar screen months later, and they still have a consistent style. And it's a shared language, so we use the same language in code as well as the design. And this means that everybody's on the same page. So for example, the designer can say, I'd like you to put a hero cell on this page, and the developer will know exactly what a hero cell is. So several companies have design languages. You may work for some of these. As I said, I used to work at the BBC. We had this design language called GEL. And this helps these companies to create their own brand identities. So at SoundCloud, we have this design language called Soul, the SoundCloud user experience language. And the architecture of it looks somewhat like this. So in the foundation level, we have things like colors. We might have typography, margins, that kind of thing. So it looks a little bit like this. So this is an example from our color file. We use this Crayola naming method. If you don't know it, it's supposed to give colors a real-world name, something that's a bit more human-readable. So we're trying to avoid the 50 Shades of Grey problem. So it'll be dark gray, darker gray, darkest gray, and this kind of thing. So we give them real names, so it's a little bit easier to use. So atoms are simple UI elements. It might be buttons or dividers, labels for things. So here are some examples of them. So we've got the like button. We have the button which we use, the label which we use on playlists to show how many tracks are in the playlist, or a preview label. And then components are just atoms which have been combined into a more complicated view, which we call components. So some examples of them are the hero cell that I mentioned before. We also have these compact list styles. And we also have these header bars. So they all live inside a component library. The component library is actually a Sketch symbol library. So if you don't use Sketch, it's a digital design app. It's really easy to use. It's vector-based. And we use it to quickly build new screens based on these existing components in the Sketch symbol library. So I'm going to show you a quick video of me using this component library and just how to make an example of a new screen from scratch. So hopefully this works. So you'll see that you can see the components on the left-hand side. And you can just drag these things in. I mean, everything has already been sized to the correct size, like the artboard is a Nexus 5. And so you can drag in things like these carousels. I can just duplicate this. And we have these overrides on the right-hand side are so you can change things like the text that you might use, which might be your final copy, or it might just give the developer an idea what the feature is supposed to be used for. And then you can also change the styles of the cells themselves. So in this case, I'm changing those things to like the style that we would use for playlists. And again, you can change some of the text on that. So this is the final design. I mean, it took, the video slightly sped up, but it maybe took 2 or 3 minutes to build that thing. So at that point now, you've got a design which you can pass to a developer. And the designers at SoundCloud do that with Zeppelin. So Zeppelin, if you don't use this either, it goes hand in hand with Sketch. And it's a handoff tool for designers. And it infers the specs from a Sketch design. So you might see a developer will be able to look at Zeppelin and see things like the size of the view, or the margins of things, or even the font information. And so that's Zeppelin. So we have also a style guide, which we have. It looks a little bit like this. So it's stored in GitHub. It's really easy to update. We have some sections of it which are manually updated, and we have some sections which are generated. So the component section at the bottom here is kind of pulled from the sketch files. So all this has been pretty good. I mean, it gives us confidence that the designs are correct. It's much faster for the designers to make new screens, and it's been great for them. I mean, they've used this for several months now. But as I said, I'm not a designer. I'm an Android engineer. So we also wanted to take the same approach that they had on the design side. We wanted to build this into a more thorough product, because at the end of the day, a design is only as good as the implementation of the design. A design is not seen by your users. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the implementation is kind of the main thing. So what do developers want? I mean, we want clean code. We want it to be no duplication, so the duplication of XML files, we want to try and avoid that. We also want everything to be easy to understand and easy to find. We want to have names for things which reveal the intention of the classes. And we want things to be decoupled, so we want a separation of concerns between things. We want to have easy changes when we want to change one area of the app. We want to make sure that that's quite easy. So I'd like you to think of your app. When you want to make a new view, have a UI, the app will contain still all of the data that needs to render on the screen. So that in our case, it would be things like track titles or artist names. All of that data still lives in your app. But then we want to introduce a library, and the library holds much more about the rendering and the actual view implementation. So the library will contain things like the style. So what I mean by style there is the layouts themselves, the layout XML files, also the fonts and the colors that you need for the view. And also the button animations, so the change from one button to another, view transitions, this kind of thing should all live inside the library as well. So you'd have also some accessibility information there, so you might have even just basic content descriptions for different views. They would live inside this library. And you might also have some dynamic content descriptions. For example, if you have a button which changes state, like a like button, when the button is liked, you want it to read something different when it's not liked. And limits, so the boundaries of the view, so things like the number of characters in a particular string, or the number of lines of a text view. All of that should live inside the library, so the data still lives inside the app. So all of the truncation then happens in the library, so the data still contains everything it needs to know, and then you truncate that sort of information in the view library. And then finally also the formatting, so formatting is things like the date formats, also number formats. I mean, we want to make sure that we have locale-specific things as well in there. So all of this can also happen inside the design library. So whilst that sounds like quite a lot of stuff, there's also a lot which is missing from the library. So for example, if you think back to a like button, when you tap on the like button, what will happen is you go to the network, you receive a response, you return the response to the client app. The app will decide what to do. It will change state if it needs to. You might also have another layer in there which it saves to a database, and then the database gets synced to the server. This kind of thing might happen, and none of this should live inside the design library. So the idea of this is that it's a pure view library, so none of the business logic lives there. And it also means that we don't require as many dependencies in this library. We don't need to have as many architecture discussions. It doesn't need to be refactored along with the rest of the app whenever we change architecture. So it looks a little bit like this. So this is the component library. We have it's made up of components, atoms, and foundation, which are the same layers that we used in the design. And then we also have the app. So the app uses this component library. So we make a new module. It's an Android library called components. We make the modules still for Atom. We make modules for foundation. And so now at this point, we've matched the design layers. And then we just need to configure the dependencies of these modules. So for example, the atoms module might rely on the foundation module, and the components relies on atoms. And then finally, the app relies on the component module. Now, the reason that we need to do this is because all resources are public by default. So what that means is when you are within Android Studio, you'll get code completion on everything. So everything that you've defined, every XML, every domain, every color, it will all be public. You can make them private by default and then just expose them at different levels. So we need to set up this. The other reason that this is quite good, because it's also possible to have naming conflicts in your r.java file. You can mitigate that by prefixing some of these library views. But generally, it's best practice to just show your implementer exactly what you want them to see. So I'm kind of using these library and modules interchangeably in this talk, and I'm sorry about that. But you need to have a discussion about whether or not you actually want it to be a standalone library, or if you can just get away with having it as modules inside the app. So for example, if it was a standalone library, you've got the advantage of being able to share it across products, which if you have multiple products in your company, it's a great thing. Which also means that you can version it properly. So you can publish a new version, you can give it proper release notes, you can bump the version in your different apps. And so it's really handy for that. Whereas a module doesn't have those features, but they are easier to build whilst you're building up something like this. And if you've only got one app, then maybe you want to just leave it as this way as well. It's slightly less complicated to set up that way. So I'll just go through exactly what is in some of these things. So as I mentioned before, the foundation level has things like the colors or the margins or the typography. It also contains at this point the formatting that we use, so locale specific formatting. So this is an example of some of the colors from the color file. It uses this Crayola naming method, with the exception potentially of SoundCloud Orange. The rest of them do use this like Crayola naming method. And everything's just defined in here as hex values. So then in your app, you can refer to those colors. You can give them more meaningful descriptions if you like. So you could, for example, use this button background where you could refer to the color cornflower. And so the idea is, at this point, it's easier to find stray colors. So if you've defined a hex color inside your app, it's a little bit easier to find. It's a little bit easier to spot. So really, you want to aim for the hex colors to be just defined in this file, and ideally just use the colors defined in your foundation level, use them in the app and try and avoid these slightly different shades. So you might also include some formatting stuff. So this is a really simple extension function which will format these numbers based on the locale of the device. So quite simply, you can show a like button with a comma separating the thousands, or dots as they use in Europe. So the atoms, again, is things like buttons, dividers, labels. They're just really simple UI elements. So again, we'll take the example of the like button. It has a width and a height. There's some definition of the drawables. There's some margin definitions. The rectangle has some sort of radius, and we use the colors that are defined in the palette. So it's quite simple, and it looks maybe something like this. You know, it's just an image view and a text view. You might wrap it inside a constraint layout if that's what you like. And it all lives inside one XML. So all of the code for that lives inside one XML. I mean, it's quite a simple view, right? It makes sense to do it that way. But I deliberately have left out styles from this. So in theory, if you have reusable components, you shouldn't need really complicated style hierarchies and parent styles. The problem with styles is that they get out of hand easily, and it's harder to read. You have to click through multiple files. You have to also understand when things are overridden and you haven't realized. And just because something happens to share the same value, it doesn't mean it has to be a style. So I would avoid using styles if possible. But one thing that I would do, so to go back to the example, is encapsulate your XML into a class. So give a class to your view. So it might look something like this. It's just a custom view class. It's a constraint layout. You can then tell it to just inflate the XML that you used before. Also, because you've at this point made your resources private, you can't access this button heart count XML anymore in the implementer, so your app. So at this point, you can make sure that everybody's going through this class. And this is just a sample use. You can just drop this in, just drop this XML in to your app code. You can make this a little bit nicer by wrapping it in an interface. You could set some really basic methods on there, like enable and disable. And for example, a count method could just take a number, and you could just like pump that number from there into the view. But you can also use that format method that I defined before, and the format method then will give you a slightly nicer formatting and will set the text of that view. And similarly for the enable method, you could, for example, have this set up as a layer list drawable where the selected state is this orange and the unselected state is a gray color, and then you could just change the state of it here. But you could also do a really complicated method. You could have loads of complicated animations happening. And the whole point of this is that you keep all of the implementation details hidden from the user. So a little bit similar to what Jit was saying earlier on today, having this interface wrapped around it means that you can then test these points rather than having to test the implementation, which is really nice. Because then the implementation just looks like this. You can just set a number on the thing, and then internally it knows what it needs to do to render this correctly. So components work in pretty much the same way as the atoms did, so we take the same approach for them. So an example of a component is something like this. So this is, we use this in search. So when you do a search on SoundCloud, you'll receive back some users, and this is the view that you'll get. It has a user avatar. There's this optional badge there, which is to represent if it's a pro user. There's some text. There's a number representing the number of followers that person has, and there's a button also to follow that person directly. So these things would be atoms. I mean, as I said, components are made up of these atoms. So some of these things, like the avatar, might be an atom already. The button itself, the follow button, might be an atom. And so we take the same approach. We have all of that stuff defined in an XML file, and then that also has a class to reference that file. And it's used in exactly the same way. So this is a sample use of the thing. You can just drop this in your app. Now, when you if you take the same approach with the interface, you get this, which gets a little bit out of control. So the main problem with this is you need to know exactly what methods to call. So if you, for example, if you forgot to set the followers count, who knows what happens? I mean, maybe it displays 0, maybe it crashes, maybe it displays blank, maybe it doesn't show the icon. It's not clear which methods are optional, which methods need to be called. So what we do for more complicated views is we wrap everything into a data model, into a view model. So in the view model, that just contains everything that you saw before, so the different lines of text, the number for the followers count, whether or not that user is a pro user, whether you're following them or not, maybe an image as well. And then to that view model, you can add logical default values. So then it makes it easier to see which are optional and which are not. So in your app, you just make this view model. And at this point, then you can see if things are optional or not. And it's a lot easier at this point to see what values you need to set up that view. And then on your view, you can just call render and just pass in that view model. So that, again, makes it really, really easy to test because you can just check that the correct view model is being sent to the view. And so then, the other advantage is that internally it just knows what to do. You don't need to have multiple methods on the thing. It just knows how to render itself. So all that's great, but there is one additional thing which we did, which I would recommend doing as well, which is to build everything into a sample app. So there are several benefits to building in a sample app. And your sample app is used to demo the components, so it's things like, what components do we even have? Like, which ones have we built? Which ones have we migrated? What do they look like? How do they work? The main advantage of building things in the sample app is that it's fast. I mean, the SoundCloud app takes several minutes to build. The sample app is seconds, so seconds versus minutes makes a big difference to your happiness. You know, it makes a big difference to whether or not a designer will want to sit next to you and watch you do something. It makes a big difference if you decide that you want to change something, maybe make an optimization. Do you really want to do that if it's going to take several minutes to build again? Maybe not. So it's really fast, and it's really good for that reason. So we also want the sample app to showcase the views. So as I said before, it showcases what views you even have. But you can also use this to showcase your best practices. So that might be your company best practices. Things like, do you use toasts over snack bars? How do you tell the user when something's changed? What do your offline states look like? Do you prefer to use like this type of list or this type of list? What do dialogues generally look like? You can use it as a really nice, easy way to put all of this in. So whilst the sample data concept isn't restricted to sample apps, you can put sample data everywhere, I think it's a really nice thing to add into a sample app. You can use sample data whilst you're building a view, and it's really nice. You can see it in the preview view. So for example, this component, this was this one from search. With just a few lines changed, you can add this sample data into the view. So you can add, for example, the avatars or first names and cities into that. So when you're actually developing the thing, it looks something like this. And this is much more exciting, it's much nicer. And you also sometimes can spot problems that you had in the original design straight away without even needing to run the project. And you can take that one step further as well. So with the sample data, you can actually define your own sample data. And your sample data at that point, you can use to showcase all of the different edge cases. So I really like this example, what happens when the text gets really long. Because the thing is, the text will always go really long. It's inevitable. And the problem with QA is that sometimes you don't notice these things straight away. You have to, whoever QAs the project will have to look through, try and find the right combination of things, try and find a combination of a user who's pro and someone who has 10,000 followers. There's lots of different combinations of even something that looks quite simple like this view. There's quite a lot of combinations of this view that which you can, at that point then, with using sample data, you can showcase. So yeah, exactly, the existence of the pro button, the different button states, so whether or not you're following someone, and you can use it to much more quickly look through and QA yourself, as well as use it for QA. So I'd like to talk a little bit more now about the project itself, so how we actually did the thing. So as I said, we started with the design side, so the design team spent quite a few months auditing all of the existing components. They then refined them, they put all of these things into Sketch, they made sure everything was correct. We did a few small design changes. And so there was some tech involvement in this. I mean, we knew that the project was going on, but it was mostly a design team thing. So they knew that the things that we wanted to talk about. And then once the mobile engineers got involved, we did a mobile workshop. So I'm saying mobile because it wasn't just Android. I mean, my examples are Android, but we had iOS completely involved as well. So we had this mobile workshop with the Android engineers and iOS engineers. They, at that point, decided on the library structure, how this thing was gonna look. We also spiked out the project itself, so we saw like how the modules would fit together and what it might look like. So we didn't involve web. I mean, as I said before, we were mobile focused anyway. But I think the main reason we didn't involve web was because the project would have got too big. So we currently don't have anything like this on web. So at the moment, we're trying it on mobile first. And there would be a plan, I think, if this is successful, to move it to web as well. So our approach was to convert the 10 most used components. So obviously, as you can imagine, the SoundCloud app was already written when we did this project. We had several views already in the app. We had loads of duplication between things. So we went for this approach of find the most used view, so say the track cell. The track cell then is pulled out into this sample app, into this component library and used in the sample app and this kind of thing. And we start with that first rather than any other thing. Because the main thing is it's such a huge app, it's such a big project that we needed to start somewhere. So we've also got this thing of if we have like new views, we might do them at the same time. But we're definitely taking a slow approach to it rather than trying to change everything all at once. We're trying to do things quite slowly. So our future plans, we need to build more components. We've only just started on this component library anyway. So we need to build more. We need to migrate more things. We'd also quite like to use some more real data, so maybe some user avatars and things like that. I mean, the design team do have some tools already, so we have this thing called SketchCloud, which allows the designers to sort of pump in user information, so things like avatars into the views, It's great for when you want to show to the board this new idea that you've got. Maybe we might need to change some of this with all these GDPR changes. Maybe we can't use real data, but something that's a little bit more like real data would be good. And I think one thing that I'd specifically like to do is to add more lint rules for these projects. So we currently use custom lint rules all over the place. So we sometimes fail the build on some of our lint rules, or we'll just put warnings on PRs. So we might use it in this case for things like if you define a color that you haven't used before, if you define a new color in your app, or if you include a drawable directly, maybe at that point you might want to tell people, are you sure you want to do this, or maybe even, like I say, fail the build. So hopefully I've convinced you that you need a design language. It wasn't plain sailing for us. It was actually quite difficult to convince people that we needed to do this thing. And I think the difficulty comes from how you measure success. So what KPI do you use to measure success? It's quite hard. Why would you rewrite stuff that's already written? Are there any problems at the moment with it? What benefit to the user is there to rewriting something? If they see it as one view and they see the same view again, there's no difference for them. At what point do you finish the project? I mean, are we going to go through every single screen and rewrite every single screen? And also, who owns the project? So is it your team? Is it another team? We have two teams at SoundCloud. One is the core team, and we have a client team as well. So that wasn't a big deal for us because we are quite a small team anyway. But what we've found so far, and what we're hoping to find from this project, is that there's just a lot more happiness between the developers and the designers. So the KPIs themselves are quite hard to find. I mean, you might do things like there might be less design bugs raised from a ticket. There might be less time wasted from a designer re-implementing a design that a developer says, oh no, I've done something similar on another screen, it looks slightly different to that. And so at that point, hopefully we can address some of the existing design bugs that we've got. I mean, maybe tickets take less time in QA, maybe they come back less from QA, but I think it's very hard to find one single thing which we can check. But what we're actually hoping for the user benefit is we hope that it will bring slightly more consistency to the views. So where we have slightly different views on different screens, we're hoping that by bringing them all together into this library, we can increase the visual identity of the brand, have a stronger brand presence, and which inevitably will build trust in the product. And I think this has been great. I mean, we were thinking of moving towards modularization anyway. Like, this is already our plan, at least on Android. I mean, in iOS they already have this modular approach, and so we were already looking to do this on Android for things like faster builds. People suggest that having modules does things like that. Things like instant apps we're currently not able to do. So yeah, I mean, it's faster for designers, it's faster for developers to build things with this framework. It also means that we have one place to go to when we want to change something, so that again should be faster. And ultimately, I think one of the things that really came out of this project was there's just better collaboration between designers and developers. So I think before this project, I don't think they completely understood where we came from, what we wanted from a design. And similarly, we've learned stuff about how they do designs. So I think that has been definitely a benefit even so far of doing this project. So finally, some tips. So work with the design team. So I think probably a lot of people are guilty of this, but if you think the design is wrong, like if there's something about the design that you don't like or you can't implement, tell them, get them to change the designs for that reason. Change it in the design language first, and then it will trickle through. Because the problem is, if the design language is wrong, it's just going to have the same problem that we had before. When another person picks up a ticket, they'll implement it a slightly different way to the first person, and then the third person will come in and implement it slightly differently again. So the idea is, work with the design team and try and change the design so that they do work for you on your platform. And then build a library, so use the same naming. Naming is really important. Like I said, designers saying, do a hero cell, developers saying, okay, I've done a hero cell. Also, it's great for onboarding new people, so new people will say, people have said that this thing's called a hero cell. I'll try and find that. I found it, I can work my way back through the code and try and work out how everything fits together. It's also great, a view is a great place for onboarding actually, because they can see the app, they can just look at the app for the first time, they can find some strings and they can work their way backwards through this UI library. So it's a nice place for people to start. And the other advantage of a library is there's just less ambiguity. So I mentioned before that we use Zeppelin for handoff between design and developers. Actually, in theory, once we've built all of these components, as long as the designs use these same components, there's probably no need for Zeppelin anymore because the designs are already existing from the existing components. So again, it should be faster as well. And the sample apps are great. I mean, they give you the source of truth. They tell you exactly what is in the app. It's great for QA, as I mentioned, trying to find all those edge cases. It's a lot faster doing it in the sample app. And you can also use it as a bit of a playground, so it's great for if you want to try something out like constraint layout, for example. You can try it in this project. The project runs much faster. You can try these things out. And it's great for prototyping as well, if maybe a designer wants to sit with you and you can work out a new page. So a sample app is really great for that. So that's me kind of done. I would love to hear from any of you if you have experiences with design languages. Any recommendations for us maybe would be really helpful. If you've done anything with modular UI, I would be also very interested in hearing anything about that. And I think I can take a couple of questions. Thank you.
So, any questions?
On the style guide documentation, you mentioned that the components came straight from Sketch. Is that a particular plugin, or is that something built in-house to handle that?
Yeah, so do you mean when I was in Sketch and sort of dragging the things in?
No, when you were in the documentation and you said the components
in the
came from...
So for the style guide?
Yes.
It's a good question. So in the style guide, I think it's mostly handled by the design team. So the style guide doesn't really change that often, to be honest. We have like some parts of that publicly accessible as well. So where you can go and get like the logos and that kind of thing. And so I'm not actually sure how that happens, but I will find out for you afterwards. I'll let you know.
Cool. Any other questions? Perfect.
Hi, good talk. So we have a design review process at the end of a ticket, which is quite laborious. The question is really, have you had that at SoundCloud before this came along, and has this process kind of built trust between you and designers to kind of take that design review away? Yeah, so we don't have design reviews all the time. We have like a QA column, and we put to QA kind of everything, and then we'll assign the QA tickets that are very view-focused to the designers, and they'll QA them. But I think because we're quite a small team, I mean, the design team is also quite small, we do tend to just speak to them as we go along as well. But we also put things in, we have like an alpha build, which we distribute internally, and the designers tend to notice. So as soon as you put in a feature that is something that they've designed, they'll probably notice within a day, even potentially before you've moved that ticket completely over to QA. So yeah, I think the whole QA process has been much faster, and I think, as you say, it does build more trust. I mean, they also know a little bit more that we're using these standardized components, and I think also the fact that the designers and the developers were all in these conversations. I think they also now know where we're coming from when we say to them, "This is kind of hard for us to do," and that kind of thing. Cool, thanks.
Anybody else? Hand at the back, yeah.
Hi there. We use Sketch at work, and you've mentioned Zeppelin as well. Just looking at Zeppelin, I just want to know what you get out of Zeppelin that you can't get out of Sketch, and why you use that.
That's a good question as well. So we have also had this conversation recently. The reason why we use Zeppelin is because we didn't have licenses for Sketch for all of the developers. And actually, I mean, I had a license, but I think most people on the team didn't. And then when we did this mobile workshop and we started using Sketch and the designers were showing people Sketch, everyone was kind of like, oh, why don't we have that? So now all of the developers have Sketch licenses, and we are probably moving towards using that anyway. I don't think there's much that you can get from Zeppelin that you can't get from Sketch. I think there is some more advanced tools of Zeppelin. I mean, I think even very recently they introduced the ability to share style guides across different projects, which I think would be quite helpful. So you can generate this style guide. I mean, there's kind of code snippets that they give you and this kind of thing. We don't really use them. I think there could be more use of Zeppelin if we wanted to do that a bit more. But I think, yeah, Sketch is a pretty great tool by itself.
Cool. Anybody else? Was there one in the middle somewhere? Yeah. Cool.
Hi, Carrie. It's great talks and some great takeaways. One thing I had, it's more of a comment more than anything, I suppose. It's trying to get your designers and things away from actual pixel perfect and all this sort of stuff, especially with fluid layouts. In iOS, we've got sort of size classes and things. So, it's trying to get that communication across to designers that things don't have to always be pixel perfect, or what are the things that do stretch and contract, I suppose. Those are the conversations we're having in bigger organisations, and it still seems to be a bit of a moot point, really. We're not having that conversation, so no real question. Thank you very much.
No, I mean, on that though, I used to work at the BBC with these guys, and we had like very similar conversations with the designers there, and I've had similar things. I mean, at SoundCloud, they're quite a small team, and because they've been doing mobile for so long, they do tend to know those things a little bit more, which is quite nice. But I think the problems are always the same. Oh, it doesn't look exactly as I designed it. But yeah, but this is a really crap phone. And things we get things like that all the time. I mean, they design for Nexus 5, and we have Nexus 5 devices, and they look at them on that, which is, I think, at least one advantage, because they are looking at them on the exact device that they use to design against. But yeah, we had very similar things. What happens to this text view? I mean, maybe you've padded the text down a certain amount, but then what do you do when the text size changes? And I think the problem with all design tools is that they do give you measurements for absolutely everything. And if you wanted to on mobile, you could use those exact measurements, but sometimes it doesn't quite work. But that's what you can use, sort of the descriptions and the comments on the actual designs themselves. So when you mark up a design, you can use that to say, okay, maybe Sketch says that this should be 19 pixels, but obviously we understand that like this isn't going to be the same in this case. And I think maybe if you start documenting those things, it becomes a little bit more of the norm. So then at least people know, okay, Zeppelin, derides this style, but I know I can't use that. You can annotate these documents with things like that.
Cool. Anybody else? Brilliant. In that case, let's show our appreciation for Carrie.